When I started YouTube, I thought the hardest part would be making videos consistently. I assumed the editing would burn me out first, or maybe the scripting. But honestly, none of that surprised me nearly as much as the silence did. I watched a ridiculous amount of YouTube advice before uploading my first video. Tutorials about thumbnails, hooks, retention, pacing, titles, and algorithms. Everyone seemed confident that if you followed the formula correctly, growth would eventually happen naturally. And to be fair, most of the advice sounded logical. Better thumbnails increase clicks. Better storytelling improves retention. Better hooks keep viewers watching longer. None of that is wrong. The problem is that almost nobody explains what happens when YouTube barely tests your content. That completely changes the emotional experience of being a creator. Because suddenly, you're not trying to improve performance. You're trying to understand whether the platform is even giving your videos a real chance in the first place. One of my videos got almost no impressions for hours. Then another slowly started getting suggested days later. Another completely flatlined. The inconsistency made the entire process feel incredibly difficult to interpret emotionally and strategically. That's when I realized something important. Most YouTube advice comes from creators who already escaped the beginning years ago. They already have subscribers, returning viewers, trust signals, and historical data attached to every upload they make. So when they say things like just make better content, they technically aren't wrong. But they're also not experiencing the same version of YouTube that brand new creators experience when uploading into complete silence. For example, I became obsessed with thumbnails for a while. I redesigned them constantly, changed colors, simplified text, added emotion, removed clutter. But eventually I realized a thumbnail can't improve click-through rate if the platform barely shows the video at all. Then I shifted focus to titles instead. More curiosity, more emotional tension, stronger wording. But again, some uploads still stalled almost immediately, which made me realize the process was far less predictable than most tutorials make it seem. And honestly, that unpredictability is what breaks most small creators psychologically. Not low views themselves, the uncertainty. Because you never fully know whether the problem is your content, your packaging, your niche, or simply lack of testing. That uncertainty slowly changes your behavior. You stop uploading naturally and start trying to outsmart the algorithm instead. Every decision becomes anxious. Every upload feels like an experiment instead of a creative project. I also noticed that a lot of YouTube advice quietly assumes you already have momentum. Advice like build community sounds amazing until you realize your videos have no comments, no returning viewers, and maybe 3 impressions total. Or when people say consistency is the secret. Again, technically true. But consistency becomes emotionally difficult when your brain starts associating uploads with disappointment instead of momentum or progress. I think that's why so many people quit early. Not because editing is hard, not because scripting is difficult, but because creating content in silence for months genuinely affects your motivation more than people expect. And the strange thing is that most successful creators barely talk about this stage anymore. Probably because once your channel grows, YouTube feels completely different. The platform starts reacting faster. Your audience returns. The system trusts your uploads more. But at the beginning, every upload feels isolated, like tossing another message into the ocean and waiting to see if anything comes back. Sometimes something does. Sometimes absolutely nothing happens at all. That's why I've started paying more attention to creators documenting the process in real time instead of only teaching from the finish line. Because real-time creators still remember what the invisible stage actually feels like emotionally. One thing I've learned already is that YouTube growth doesn't behave linearly. A video can sit dormant for days and suddenly begin getting impressions later. Another can spike briefly and disappear forever. The system behaves far more chaotically than most people realize. And honestly, that changed my expectations completely. I stopped expecting every upload to prove whether I was succeeding or failing immediately. Instead, I started treating each video more like another data point in a much longer process. That mindset helped more than I expected. Not because low views stopped bothering me, because they still do, but because I stopped interpreting every weak upload as evidence that the channel was doomed permanently. Ironically, the more realistic my expectations became, the less emotionally exhausting YouTube started feeling. I still check analytics too much, I still overanalyze impressions, but I'm beginning to understand that slow growth is probably more normal than creators admit publicly. And maybe that's the real problem with most YouTube advice. It skips the hardest chapter entirely. The part where nobody knows who you are, the platform barely trusts your uploads, and every video feels like shouting into empty space. Because once creators escape that stage, their perspective changes completely. But right now, while I'm still inside it, I think the emotional reality of starting YouTube matters just as much as the technical advice people repeat constantly online. So I'm still uploading, still experimenting, still trying to improve. But at least now I understand that struggling early doesn't automatically mean failure. Sometimes it just means you're experiencing the stage that almost nobody talks about honestly enough.